Hello and welcome to Support for Worried Homeschooling Parents, a place dedicated to supporting you on your homeschooling journey. Today, a story from a homeschooling father, Leon. The phone call was as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass. Leon, I can't do it anymore. It's not working. They've removed him from this school now too. That was his last chance for schools here. I can't do it anymore. You have to come get him. Her voice was stretched thin, worn down to a wire of exhaustion and resignation. There was no room for discussion, no space for my pleas or questions. Just like that, Ray, my 13-year-old son, was being permanently sent my way, a 100-mile journey from his mother's house. To say his life had been unsettled would be a massive understatement. It had been a revolving door of schools since he started. I tried to be a constant. I really did. I'd make that 200-mile round trip every other weekend, armed with cinema tickets and pizza money. But distance has a cruel way of turning a father into a visitor, a fun distraction rather than a parent. Now, the distance was gone, but so was his school, his friends, and his entire life. The drive to pick him up was the longest 2 hours of my life. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and guilt. What was I going to do? I lived in a small 2-bedroom flat, a bachelor pad really. It was a space for one person. A person who worked too much as a graphic designer and subsisted on takeout and burnt toast. It wasn't a home for a teenage boy. I looked at the passenger seat, imagining him sitting there, a stranger I shared DNA with, his silence filling the car like a fog. I didn't even know what size shoes he wore. When he came out, he was carrying a single overstuffed backpack and nothing else. He didn't look at me. He just got in the car, pulled his hood over his head, and stared out the window, a wall of glass and sullen silence between us. I'm Leon, 32, and until that moment, my biggest parenting challenge was trying to fill the awkward silences on a weekend phone call. Now, I was a full-time, single dad to a teenager who looked at me like I was just another part of the problem. The school system had given up on him. His own mother had given up on him. And as I drove, a cold, hard knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I was terrified. Those first few days were brutal. The silence in the car was nothing compared to the oppressive quiet in the apartment. He'd hole up in his new room, my old office, the door always closed. I'd try to start a conversation, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. Hungry? I'd ask. A shrug. Want to watch a film? A shake of the head. His answers were delivered in sighs and monosyllables. I'm Leon, and I was completely, totally out of my depth. After a weekend of this suffocating tension, I figured structure was the answer. It's what school provides, right? A schedule, rules, a clear path. So, Monday morning, 9 a.m, sharp, I sat him at the kitchen table. I'd gone out in a panic and spent a small fortune on a stack of textbooks for his grade level. Right, I said, arranging them in a neat pile, trying to project a confidence I absolutely did not feel. We're going to make this work. A new start. Let's start with history. It was a catastrophe. He couldn't sit still. His leg bounced a frantic, maddening rhythm against the table leg. His fingers drummed a restless, irritating beat on the cover of the book. He'd get up to sharpen a pencil he hadn't even used, then wander over to the window to stare at a pigeon on the ledge. I would point to a paragraph, start reading it aloud, my voice straining with false enthusiasm, and his eyes would just glaze over. He wasn't being defiant, not in an aggressive way. It was more like the words on the page were a static hiss, an alien frequency his brain refused to process. He's easily distracted, his old teachers used to say. That was the understatement of the century. After an hour of me reading aloud about Norman conquests to a boy who was mentally a million miles away, he finally broke. "This is stupid. It's just words. It doesn't mean anything," he yelled, his voice cracking with a frustration that seemed to come from a place deeper than just this one lesson. "It's all just dates and names. Who cares? It's not real." He shoved the book away from him, and it slid off the table, landing on the floor with a heavy, accusatory thud. He stormed off to his room, and the door slammed with a finality that seemed to shake the whole flat. I was left alone in the kitchen, staring at the open textbook on the floor. The faint, lingering smell of my own burnt toast from a failed breakfast attempt earlier that morning still hung in the air. I couldn't teach him. I couldn't even cook for him. My carefully ordered life had been turned completely upside down, and in my clumsy attempt to create order for him, I'd only made more chaos. The next few weeks were a painful, repeating montage of failure. Each morning, I'd wake up with a fresh dose of optimistic energy, a new plan, and each morning it would be ground down to nothing by lunchtime. I tried every angle on homeschooling I could find online. We tried online videos, but he'd just open another tab and scroll through memes. We tried an educational app that promised to make math fun, but after 10 minutes of its chirpy music and repetitive loops, he declared it was for babies and refused to touch it again. We tried watching a stunningly produced documentary on the cosmos, full of swirling galaxies and mind-bending physics, and halfway through, he sighed and said, "I get it. Space is big. Can I go to my room now?" Nothing stuck. The tension in our little flat became a physical thing, a third resident in our home that fed on our mutual frustration. Arguing became our main form of communication, short, sharp bursts of my exasperation clashing against his sullen silence, always followed by long, punishing hours of him in his room and me in the living room, stewing in my own failure. My own life was fraying at the seams. I was trying to juggle my job as a graphic designer from home, but my focus was completely shattered. I remember being on a critical conference call with a new client, trying to explain a complex branding concept for a new tech startup. In the background, a shouting match erupted from the living room. It was about him not clearing the cereal bowl he'd left on the coffee table. So small, so stupid, but in that moment, it felt enormous. I was frantically hitting the mute button, my face burning with humiliation as I stammered apologies. My boss later sent me a curt email about background noise and maintaining professionalism. I could feel my career, my one area of competence, slipping through my fingers like sand. My attempts at being a homemaker were even more pathetic. I'm not a cook. I never have been. My specialty is ordering pizza. I'd follow YouTube tutorials with the intense concentration of a bomb disposal expert, measuring every ingredient with surgical precision, and still end up with something barely edible. I once tried to make a simple chili and created a brown, watery soup that tasted vaguely of disappointment and cumin. Another night, I attempted spaghetti bolognese and ended up with a pan of scorched mince and pasta that was somehow both crunchy and slimy. The kitchen looked like a war zone after every meal, and I'd spend what felt like hours scrubbing pans with burnt-on food, feeling my hope char and flake away with it. I watched Ray retreat further and further into himself, his phone, his only companion, the blue light of the screen illuminating his face in the dark of his room. I'd snap at him about screen time, my voice tight with a fear I couldn't articulate. "You can't just waste your life on pointless games, Ray," I'd say, my words laced with panic. I had no idea what he was doing on there. I just assumed the worst. I felt that universal parental fear twisting in my gut, the fear that my child was broken, that he was being left behind, that he wouldn't fit into the world, and that he was destined to fail. And the heaviest burden of all was the chilling certainty that it was all my fault. One night, after a particularly awful day where a simple lesson on fractions ended with both of us red-faced and close to tears, I called my mum. "I don't know what to do," I confessed, my voice cracking, the facade of the capable father crumbling into dust. He won't listen. He won't learn. I say a word, and it's like it hits a brick wall. It's not that he's not smart, Mum. It feels like his brain is just wired differently from everyone else's. I feel like I'm losing him. Oh, Leon, she said, her voice so gentle it almost made me cry. Just be there for him. Forget the schoolwork for a minute. Just love him. Love him? Of course, I loved him. The love was a fierce, aching thing in my chest that kept me up at night. But love wasn't going to teach him math. Love wasn't going to get him qualifications or a job. Love felt flimsy and abstract, a useless sentiment in the face of such a concrete, overwhelming problem. The breaking point came a few days later. I woke up with a pounding headache and a fever that left me weak and shivering. The stress had finally won, my body waving a white flag. I managed to drag myself out of bed to tell Ray there'd be no school today, then collapsed back under the duvet, feeling utterly defeated. I was sick. My son was a stranger in my house. My job was in jeopardy, and I had completely and totally failed at the most important task I'd ever been given. I drifted into a restless, feverish sleep, convinced that things couldn't possibly get any worse. I woke up a few hours later to a smell. It wasn't the familiar, acrid scent of my own burnt toast or the simmering aroma of my culinary failures. It was incredible. It was the rich, nutty smell of melted butter, of fresh herbs, of savoury, perfectly cooked bacon. It was the smell of a happy Sunday morning, and it was happening on a miserable Tuesday afternoon. I stumbled out of my bedroom, confused, my head still fuzzy and aching from the fever, half convinced I was hallucinating. And there it was, on the kitchen table, which was actually clean for once, wiped down and clear of my junk mail and dirty mugs, was a plate. On that plate were perfectly scrambled eggs, fluffy and light, a creamy, pale yellow flecked with finely chopped chives. Next to them, 2 slices of sourdough toast, grilled to a perfect golden brown, glistening with melted butter. And beside them, 3 strips of streaky bacon, cooked to a flawless, uniform crispiness. It was a plate of breakfast you'd get in a high-end cafe, the kind you take a picture of. Next to the plate stood Ray, nervously wiping his clean hands on a tea towel, watching me with an anxious expression I hadn't seen before. I just stood there, staring. I looked at the plate. I looked at my son. This wasn't just breakfast, this was art. This was a meal cooked with a level of care, precision, and understanding that I couldn't even comprehend, let alone achieve. My own culinary attempts were like a child's crayon drawing next to this masterpiece. My son was kicked out of school, the thought echoed in my head, and he just cooked me this. I saw you were sick, he mumbled, his eyes darting from my face to the plate, not meeting my gaze. I figured you were hungry. I sat down, my legs still shaky, and picked up the fork. I took a bite. The eggs were like a cloud. The toast had the perfect crunch, both soft and crisp at once. The bacon was salty, smoky perfection. It was, without a single shred of exaggeration, the best breakfast I had ever eaten in my entire life. And in that one moment, the past month of struggle, of fighting and failure, didn't disappear, but it rearranged itself. It was like a kaleidoscope shifting, the same broken pieces forming a whole new, beautiful picture. He wasn't wired wrong. He was wired for doing. "Ray," I said, my voice thick with an emotion that surprised me. This is amazing. How did you do this?" For the first time in weeks, he really looked at me, a flicker of pride in his eyes, and a real conversation, the first of our new life, finally started. He told me he'd been watching cooking channels for years, not just wasting time on games like I'd assumed. He talked about the science of emulsifying the butter and egg yolks at a low, steady temperature to make them creamy. The importance of controlling the heat to stop the proteins from getting tough and rubbery. He explained the Maillard reaction, the chemical process that made the toast and bacon so flavorful and brown. He didn't just follow a recipe, he understood the why behind every single step. He was a kinesthetic learner. He needed to touch, to feel, to experiment, to create. The abstract world of textbooks was a prison for his bright, practical mind, but the tangible, sensory world of the kitchen that was his kingdom. That breakfast changed everything. It was the key that unlocked him. The kitchen became our classroom. Cooking became our curriculum. We didn't just cook, we learned, side by side. The first weekend, we tackled a roast chicken. He was the head chef. I was the clumsy assistant. He taught me how to properly truss the bird, explaining how it helped the legs and breasts cook evenly. That was physics. He had me make a gravy, and a lesson on fractions came naturally when we had to double a recipe to feed my mum, who I'd invited over. She cried when she tasted his food, tears of relief and pride running down her cheeks. Costing out a big shop to see what we could afford for the week became a lesson in budgeting and economics. He started a small black notebook and began writing down his own recipes. His handwriting, which had been a desperate, angry scrawl on his school worksheets, was now neat and careful, with detailed instructions and little diagrams for plating. This from the boy who refused to write a single sentence about the Norman conquests. He was learning measurements, chemistry, time management, and complex problem solving, all while doing something he genuinely loved. One day, he shyly asked if he could borrow my phone. He started making his own short cooking tutorials, setting up my phone on a stack of books, as he confidently explained the steps to a perfect bolognese, one that was 1,000,000 miles away from my own burnt offering. He began researching what it takes to own a food truck, creating spreadsheets of potential costs, supplier prices, and profit margins. He presented it to me one evening, a full, detailed business plan. This wasn't just a hobby anymore, it was a vocation, a passion that had ignited his intelligence in a way 13 years of formal schooling never could. He was energized, focused, and for the first time since I could remember, he was deeply, truly proud of himself. His school reports had told him he wasn't smart, but here, in the alchemy of the kitchen, he was a genius. Our relationship transformed completely. The tense, angry silences were replaced by the collaborative, happy chaos of a busy kitchen. We didn't just talk, we connected. We'd chop vegetables side by side, and he'd tell me about his ideas for new dishes, and I'd tell him about my design projects. We found a common language, not of words, but of shared purpose and creativity. We laughed when I inevitably messed something up, covering the kitchen in a dusting of flour, and I felt a wave of awe watching him expertly fix my mistakes. I learned to see my son not as a problem to be fixed, but as a brilliant, creative, and talented person with a different way of seeing and interacting with the world. I even started to think about how his mother, Natalie, would see this. She'd be so proud, not just of his skill, but of the man he was becoming: thoughtful, passionate, and confident. I learned that success doesn't always look like a report card full of good grades and a straight path to university. Sometimes, success is quieter. Sometimes, it's the intense focus in a boy's eyes as he masters a new skill. Sometimes, it's the confidence he finds in creating something beautiful and delicious with his own two hands. And sometimes, it looks and tastes like a perfectly cooked breakfast made for you by your son when you need it most. The most important lessons, I discovered, aren't always taught in a classroom or read from a textbook. They're learned through experience, through passion, and sometimes they're learned through the simple, profound act of a father and son cooking a meal together Thank you so much for watching and for letting us share this story with you. If it resonated, we'd be so grateful if you'd consider subscribing to the channel. You can watch another one of our stories about overcoming challenges here, or check out this one that our viewers have particularly enjoyed.